Okay, our next type of epithelium is possibly my favorite variety of epithelium, and it's called pseudostratified columnar epithelium, and it looks something like this. We have these tall cells, but you know what? They're not all that uniform. They kind of have a bit of a trapezoidal appearance to them, and so we get these cells that look kind of like this. In fact, some of the cells go all the way to the top, or the free surface called the apical surface. And some of them just don't make it up to that apical surface. So some of them make it all the way up to the top and some of them don't. And what happens, if we look at this tissue, we see that the nuclei are kind of bouncing all the way, kind of up and down. They're not physically bouncing, but they appear to be kind of in multi-layered or multiple vertical locations. They're not all uniformly oriented across one layer. And so what this gives the appearance of this tissue, it looks like type of epithelium looks like it is stratified. It looks like it has multiple layers, when in fact each of these cells does make contact with the basement membrane. This is the basement membrane. Okay. So this is called the apical surface, and this is the surface that rests against the basement membrane is called the basal surface. Okay. Now, this type of epithelium is really simple epithelium. So because it looks like it's stratified, we call it pseudostratified. Pseudo kind of meaning false. It's pseudostratified columnar epithelium. There's another specialization that we frequently find with this variety of epithelium, and that's that this apical surface has these hair-like extensions on the surface, on the apical or free surface, and those hair-like extensions are called cilia. The cilia move in like a wave-like fashion, and they can propel mucus and other fluids across this membrane. Okay, so pseudostratified columnar epithelium is sometimes called pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium if it's ciliated. Okay? So let's talk about the functions of pseudostratified columnar epithelium. One of its functions is really based on the fact that it is mostly ciliated. So it has the function of propelling mucus. It's also involved in secretion as well. Where do we find it? Where do we find it? Some example locations. We find it in the upper respiratory tract, in most of the upper respiratory tract, like the trachea. We also find it in the nasal cavity. We also find it in the sperm-carrying ducts. We find it in the sperm-carrying ducts. So in the male sperm ducts, or sperm, we'll say male reproductive ducts. They are ciliated. We have other places that are ciliated as well. I would guess, or I would, as I would memorize this, I would memorize that the upper respiratory tract is a primary place to find pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium, and that its job is to propel mucus. It also does some secretion as well. Okay? Let's take a look at some pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium as we find it in the trachea. Okay, here we are, and we are in the trachea. This would be the inside of the trachea, the lumen of the trachea. And so we'll look at what the epithelium looks like on its innermost surface. And we'll zoom in and find a really good example. Oh, look at this. We are getting to visualize some cilia. This is going to clear up here just in a second. We see some cilia at this free edge right here. You can see the nuclei kind of vertically mismatched with one another, giving it the appearance of being stratified. Okay? And all along we're able to see great examples of cilia along this free edge. This is pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. And so as this clears up, we should be able to see some really good examples of the cell shape, as well as the variable vertical orientation of the nucleus away or towards the basal surface. I went and searched the other side of the slide, and here we can see really, really well the cilia and then the pseudostratified columnar cells beneath. Okay, we're ready for stratified squamous epithelium. And stratified squamous epithelium appears to have layer upon layer upon layer of cells. Now, there's something I want to share with you. I'm going to kind of draw these first cells here. This is the apical side. And as I draw, I'm going to kind of change my drawing a little bit. I'm going to make these cells appear a little bit more, maybe even cuboidal in their appearance, where they're becoming kind of deeper. And so as we get deeper, yet we're getting cells that appear to be more round or spherical or almost globular in appearance. Yet at the free surface, at the apical surface, they are definitely squamous. Whenever we look at a stratified variety of epithelium, we always describe the cell shape by the cells that are sitting on the apical or free surface of the tissue type. So even though you see some cells that are clearly not squamous down here at the basal surface, the cells that are at the apical surface are the cells that matter in terms of naming convention. Now, the function of stratified squamous epithelium is protection. We find that on the external surface of the body, these cells that are short and flat like this, they're largely dead. They're dead flat sacs full of keratin. On the external surface of the body, they're keratinized, and they have a waterproofing effect. But for function, we can say protection. They protect against abrasion, extreme temperatures, any sort of chemical stimulus. Protection is the function of stratified squamous epithelium. Now, examples of location. I would put as my first example, I would put the epidermis of the skin. We also find it in the oral cavity. We also find it in the vaginal cavity. And it is protection against abrasion in many of these cases that is provided. Okay? So we're going to take a look at stratified squamous epithelium under the microscope next. Okay, we're back at the University of Michigan's virtual Slidebox website, and we are going to take a look for some stratified squamous epithelium. And as I zoom in, you can see that we have epithelium that is appearing to be definitely multi-layered. Look at these cells, how short and flat they are. And at this point, we don't see many nuclei remaining in these cells. If they are, they're very short and flat. These cells do not appear to be squamous in appearance, but these cells are pushing out towards the apical surface and will eventually become these short, flat cells that will be sloughed off. This is a great example of stratified, multiple layered, squamous epithelium. And remember, the squamous cells are the only ones that are at the surface, the free surface of the apical surface of the tissue, although we define the whole tissue as stratified squamous epithelium. Okay, our last variety of epithelium that we're going to spend some time talking about is transitional epithelium. Now, transitional epithelium has kind of an irregular shape to the cells, and they're layered. They're definitely layered on one another. We might see somewhere in the neighborhood of like 6 to 8 cell layers in total depth. And the thing about transitional epithelium is that layering differs depending on whether the tissue is being stretched or not. See, transitional epithelium with this kind of soap bubbly appearance, maybe soap bubbly isn't the perfect word to use, but this irregular layered appearance, it has the ability to distend or stretch, and so it becomes flatter vertically upon stretching, and the cell layers reduce overall. Its function is the fact that it's able to stretch. So the best example of a location that we would find transitional epithelium is the urinary bladder. Again, I'm going to take just a minute and show you an example of transitional epithelium from the slide box. Okay, here's an example of transitional epithelium. You can see these irregular cell shapes. Sometimes, especially in the urinary bladder, the free edge appears kind of rippled, almost like this does in this case. And you can see multiple layers of cells, and these cells will reduce in their overall number of layers as it is stretched. This is actually an example from a ureter, which is another place that we can find transitional epithelium. The ureter delivers urine from the kidney to the bladder. Okay, here is another really good example of transitional epithelium. This one is from the urinary bladder, and you can see the irregular cell shapes, and that there's somewhere between the neighborhood of 4 to 6, maybe even 8 layers. Here's another view. That's transitional epithelium that you see here, right here. Okay, well that kind of completes our tour of epithelium. There are a couple of varieties of epithelium that are in your text and lab book, but I did not cover and will not be in your lab exam. Not covered and not, most importantly, not tested for this class, General A&P. We have no stratified cuboidal and no stratified columnar. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this first video. Okay, I hope that this video series covering epithelium is helpful to you. I will continue with connective tissue, nervous tissue, and then finally muscle.